I never imagined that at 75 years old, I would be testing my own husband like a schoolboy caught whispering lies. After spending more than half a century sharing a home, dreams, and disappointments with Daniel, I believed we had earned the right to trust each other without question. Yet trust, once a warm blanket, had begun to feel thin and frayed, letting cold drafts of doubt seep through. It started subtly, the way storms do. Daniel stopped asking where I was going when I left the house. He used to fuss, asking if I had my sweater or reminding me to take my cane. But lately he hardly looked up. He'd sit in his chair, phone in hand, angling the screen away from me as though I'd suddenly grown unworthy of seeing whatever lit up his face. The man who once told me every thought that crossed his mind now said, "It's nothing," more times than I could count. That phrase stung more than I let him see. There were nights, more frequent than I admitted, when he stayed up late after I'd gone to bed. I would hear floorboards creak under slow, deliberate footsteps. Sometimes he whispered into his phone, and if I shifted even slightly, the whisper stopped. Silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it screams. My heart, already fragile with age, began to feel bruised. I tried to remind myself that doubt destroys more marriages than betrayal itself. But Daniel was making it too easy for suspicion to root itself. And the worst part? I still wanted to believe him, even as logic begged me to open my eyes. The turning point came on a Wednesday morning. I had gone into his study to leave a cup of tea, something I'd been doing for decades. Instead of the grateful smile he once gave me, he jolted upright like I'd caught him stealing. Papers scattered across the desk, letters I didn't recognize, and worst of all, a look of annoyance flickered across his eyes. "Knock next time," he muttered, snatching the cup from my hands. I walked out with my chest tight, like someone had tied a rope around my ribs. At my age, you learn to read people not by what they say, but what they try to hide. And Daniel was hiding something, someone perhaps. That afternoon, I sat on the porch wrapped in the old quilt my sister made decades ago. I watched the wind bend the trees and wondered if I had become invisible to the man I once believed I'd grow old with. The loneliness I felt wasn't the kind that comes from being alone. It was the kind that comes from being forgotten. It was then the idea formed, not out of revenge but out of desperation. I needed to know the truth, even if the truth broke me. I needed to see whether Daniel still held loyalty to me, or whether he had already replaced me in ways I feared. The plan was simple, and that frightened me more than anything. I told Daniel I was going on a 2-week trip with an old friend from my knitting club. His reaction, or lack of one, nearly confirmed everything. "Oh," he said, barely lifting his eyes. "Have a nice time." No hesitation. No concern. No questions. Just oh. I felt my heart twist like damp fabric wrung too tight. That night, while he watched television, I packed a small suitcase. I didn't take much, just clothing, my medications, and a photograph of myself at 20 years old. I needed a reminder of the woman I used to be before time, grief, and now betrayal carved their marks into me. When I walked out the door the following morning, Daniel didn't even walk me to the car. But I wasn't going far. Just far enough to see who he became once he believed I was gone. The cottage I rented was only 12 minutes from my house, but it felt like another world. It was small, quiet, smelling faintly of pine wood and old winters. I spent the first few days pacing the creaky floorboards, wondering whether I had made a mistake. Perhaps Daniel was simply tired. Perhaps age had softened his affection, not replaced it. Perhaps I had imagined the shift entirely. But by the 5th day, I stopped lying to myself. I knew Daniel too well. I had lived beside that man for more years than some people get to live their entire lives. And whatever had nested inside him lately, distance, secrecy, something slick and poisonous, I knew it wasn't my imagination. On the 7th night, the weight of not knowing became too much to bear. I had to see for myself. The truth is cruel, but uncertainty is torture. I waited until the sky turned black and the world hushed. I borrowed the cottage owner's old sedan, something discreet, something Daniel wouldn't recognize. The drive home was slow, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Every turn felt heavier, like I was steering not a car, but the final chapter of my marriage. When I reached our street, I turned off the headlights and rolled the car quietly to the curb across from my house. The windows glowed warmly, far too warmly for a man who had always preferred dim lights and early nights. Then I saw it. A woman's silhouette passed by the living room window. My breath froze, caught somewhere between my lungs and heart. The woman wasn't me. She walked confidently, like she belonged there. I pressed a hand to my chest, not because of fear, but to keep my heart from tearing itself apart. I waited several minutes before stepping out of the car. The night air felt colder than it should have. I moved quietly across the lawn, my cane tucked under my arm to keep it from tapping against the ground. 60 years of homemaking had taught me exactly which floorboards creaked, both inside and outside my house. I slipped through the back door using the old spare key Daniel had forgotten existed. The house smelled different. Lavender perfume. Wine candles. Something floral and too sweet. Nothing like the eucalyptus scent I had always used. My lungs tightened as I crept through the kitchen, into the hallway, stopping just before the living room entrance. I leaned slightly, just enough to see the edge of the couch. There they were. Daniel sat too close to a woman with short golden curls, and a smile that made my stomach twist. She wore my robe, the soft blue one Daniel had given me for my 62nd birthday. Her feet were propped on my coffee table, and her hands draped over his shoulder like vines claiming a tree. I stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding in my ears. "Do you really think she'll come back?" the woman asked, her voice sugary with cruelty. Daniel laughed, a laugh I hadn't heard in years. "Not with me. She's old. Tired. The trip will do her good. Maybe she'll stay longer this time." The woman giggled. "And if she doesn't? We'll figure something out," he said casually. "She can't manage the house much longer. The place is too big for her anyway. A retirement home would probably be better." They weren't just replacing me. They were planning a future without me in it. I pressed a fist to my mouth to keep from making a sound. The betrayal didn't stab me. It smothered me, slow, heavy, suffocating. Then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I felt every ounce of the wound, Daniel removed his wedding ring. I watched him place it on the table casually, like it meant nothing. The ring I had watched him cherish for decades now sat discarded between them like a piece of trash. My knees trembled. I felt 75 all at once. The woman leaned her head on his shoulder. "Soon we won't have to hide anything," she whispered. "Soon. Not later. Not maybe. Soon." My heart cracked, not loudly, but with the quiet devastation of something that had been breaking for years. I slipped out of the house as silently as I came, retreating into the night before my strength gave out. But as I reached the car, a strange, cold calm washed over me. They thought they had time. They thought they had power. They thought age had weakened me. But they had forgotten something important. Something they would soon regret. This was still my home. My life. My story. And I wasn't done yet. I drove back to the cottage with a steadiness I didn't recognize. Grief should have swallowed me whole. But instead, something sharper rose in its place: clarity. I had spent my entire adulthood believing that kindness, patience, and loyalty were enough to build a life upon. Perhaps they once were. But at 75, staring betrayal in its true face, I finally learned something. People show you who they are when they think they will never face consequences. By the time I reached the cottage, my tears were gone. My hands didn't shake anymore. I had been humiliated, erased, and spoken of like a burden, but I still had something Daniel and his little guest didn't have: control. Everything we owned, every brick of the house, every dollar in our retirement funds, every acre of the land we bought together, was legally mine. It had always been in my name for reasons Daniel never cared to understand. He once told me, "You handle the paperwork, sweetheart. I trust you." Trust, it turned out, is easier to give when you think you will always hold the power. Oh, how wrong he was. I spent the next morning gathering documents from the cottage's small dining table. I had brought a folder with me when I left the house. One that held copies of our deeds, wills, and accounts. I suspect part of me knew I'd need them. My hands moved with the certainty of a woman who had raised children, managed a household, buried loved ones, and survived a world that often underestimates women. Especially older women. My first call was to an attorney named Caroline. She was younger, sharp-minded, and one of the few people who never looked at me as elderly. but as experienced. When she answered, I said only 5 words. I need to update everything. She didn't ask why. She simply told me to come in. Sitting in her office was strangely empowering. The walls were lined with books, the carpet thick enough to soften every footstep. Caroline listened as I quietly explained what I had witnessed. Not dramatically, not tearfully, just truthfully. And she nodded, her jaw tightening. Everything is in your name, she said. That gives you full authority. You can remove him from the home immediately if you choose. You can revoke his access to all joint accounts. Even his car is technically yours. I exhaled slowly. Good. For the first time in days, I felt my age lift off me like a heavy coat. We spent hours updating documents, revising my will so that not a single penny would ever find its way into Daniel's hands. Instead, my remaining wealth would go to charities, old friends, and the few family members who still showed genuine care. I arranged for the house to be secured legally under my sole control. I even authorized account freezes that would go into effect within 48 hours. After signing the last page, Caroline placed her hand over mine. I'm sorry, she said softly. I gave her a small smile. Don't be. This is the most alive I've felt in years. Next, I called a moving company, large, reputable, discreet. I told them I needed the house cleared of everything that didn't belong to me. I specifically asked for female movers, not because of strength but because women understand betrayal differently. They scheduled me for the next morning. Then came the sweetest part of the plan. Having Evelyn's belongings legally removed, Caroline prepared a notice stating that any items proven to be hers must be moved out immediately, as she had no right to reside or store anything on my property. She would get her clothes, her bags, her perfumes, and nothing more. No nest building for her. No comfort. No sense of belonging. That night, as I sat alone in the cottage, I felt an unexpected peace settle around me. Not because I wanted revenge for cruelty. That was too small, too shallow. No. My peace came from reclaiming myself. For decades, I had been Daniel's wife, the dependable one, the caretaker. But now, I was simply a woman who remembered her worth. A woman who refused to be discarded like an old coat hung too long in the closet. They thought they were planning for my disappearance. But I was planning for theirs. And by tomorrow evening, everything would begin to fall exactly into place. The next morning, I woke early. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. I felt strangely alive, even exhilarated. For the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's betrayal on my back. I was standing on my own, fully in control. I arrived at my house with Caroline, my attorney, and the moving crew. They looked at me with a mix of respect and quiet astonishment. 75 years old, and yet walking through the doors as though I owned not just the house, but the world. In a sense, I did. The front door opened before Daniel could even realize I had returned. He had been lounging in the living room with Evelyn, sipping coffee, talking about some small, mundane plan for their future together. When he finally looked up, his face drained of color. What are you doing here? He stammered, a hint of panic creeping into his voice. I smiled, calm and deliberate. I came back, I said softly. And I brought company. Caroline stepped forward, handing Daniel a thick envelope. All documents regarding the property, accounts, and ownership have been updated, she said. Everything in this house legally belongs to her. You and your guest have 20 minutes to collect any personal items you can prove are yours. Evelyn froze, her eyes wide. She clutched her bag, the soft blue robe she had worn last night now wrinkled and unfamiliar on her shoulders. But, she started, and then stopped. There was no argument, no manipulation that could undo what had been done. Daniel sputtered, trying to find a word, a threat, anything that would assert control. But there was none. He was powerless, and he knew it. The ring that once bound us together, discarded and forgotten, now symbolized nothing. I walked past him, my cane tapping lightly against the floor, each step deliberate, a rhythm of authority. You plan to erase me, I said quietly, letting my words land like soft stones thrown into a pond. Now I'm erasing you. The movers stepped in, quietly but efficiently, and began to remove everything that wasn't mine. Clothes, bags, furniture that Evelyn had brought. Everything had to go. They could take the physical objects, but they could not touch my memories, my dignity, or my life. I sat down in the living room once the process began, letting the cool morning light spill over me. Daniel's protests grew frantic, but it was too late. The house had become a courtroom, and justice was silent but firm. Evelyn's tears fell quietly. Daniel's shame was visible in every line of his face. They had assumed I was weak, that age would diminish my spirit. But they had underestimated me. When the last box was loaded, when the door finally closed behind the moving truck, silence settled over the house. I felt the years fall away. The weight of expectation, of disappointment, of betrayal. I had been stripped of nothing. Sitting in my reclaimed home, I allowed myself a deep exhale. Grief came, yes. The grief of lost years, of love given and wasted, of trust betrayed. But peace came too. A quiet, unwavering sense that I had chosen myself at last. I spent the rest of the day walking through each room, touching objects that had always belonged to me, breathing in the scent of familiarity and autonomy. I made plans for the future. Not a future bound to anyone else, not one dictated by loyalty or obligation, but my own. Travel, new experiences, books I wanted to read, music I wanted to play loud and unapologetically. The revenge was not cruel. It was precise, measured, and legal. It was an assertion that my life still had value. That betrayal could not erase the years I had lived fully and fiercely. Daniel and Evelyn were left with nothing. And yet the sweetest part of all was that I didn't feel triumphant at their misery. I felt alive, free, whole. And as the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, I realized something powerful. I had survived betrayal, and I had reclaimed my life. The rest of my days would belong to me, entirely and without compromise. Finally, I was done testing anyone, except myself, to see how strong I could truly be. And the answer, at last, was crystal clear.